Bateman Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Bateman's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at batemanresources.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Jordan Bateman, the BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Welcome back to the show, Jordan.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
The federal budget is coming up next week, and of course, we're always a little scared waiting for it to happen because they might be boosting taxes. Right now, they're talking, it's not the government talking, but critics saying there's chatter about raising the GST. Would that be a good idea?
No, I think it would be a terrible idea, given the state of the Canadian economy. So, from time to time, I get asked about sales taxes. Rick Peterson, who's one of the no-hope candidates for the Conservative Party leadership, he's running on a platform of cutting income taxes and instead raising GST by 4 or 5 points or something. I remember once some very nice people from the Christian Heritage Party calling me and asking me what I thought of their budget proposal, which was virtually to eliminate income tax and instead increase sales tax several points. The big flaw in this plan is geography. So 3/4 of Canadians live within an hour or an hour and a half of the U.S. border. And if you raise GST on all of these different products, you are going to merely drive people literally across the border to the United States to buy goods. And yeah, you may be able to catch some of them on the way back and get them to pay their taxes. But, there are exemptions, there are rules, there's agreements between Canada and the U.S. on duties and taxation and whatnot. You just wouldn't be able to capture all that income coming or all those goods coming back. And, you're just kind of shifting your problem. So I'm not a big fan of increasing GST. I think it ends up driving people elsewhere. And in a world where things get shipped to our door now from websites all over the place, it doesn't make a lot of sense. We live in the Amazon, Alibaba world, and it's just not to double down on GST now. It doesn't make sense financially.
Also, too, with Donald Trump talking about cutting taxes in the U.S., Canada has to remain competitive, don't we?
Well, that's very true. So Donald Trump is going to cut income taxes. He's going to cut business taxes. He's already kiboshed any talk of a carbon tax. And the marginal tax rate in the United States is going to, continue to go down. They already have lower gas taxes. And so then you'll just begin the old, that kind of early 90s brain drain where people are going to start, being attracted to the United States. And as repulsive to most Canadians as Donald Trump is, most Canadians I don't think would be terribly. I think you'd find a lot of people would be willing to live in the Seattle, Portland, San Franciscos of the world. So, with or without Trump in charge. So that's another big concern. You've got to stay competitive with your neighbor. Simply because. People can be attracted across the line. Businesses, where they're going to decide to set up or move, it's going to be determined by that, and sales tax factor into that overall thing. The big problem with the federal government, look, yeah, they're in deficit. They're in deficit because they're spending like drunk sailors, and that's probably an insult to drunk sailors. I mean, these guys came in promising $10 billion a year deficits, so $40 billion over 4 years. They've hit that basically in the first year and a half of their mandate. They have no plan to balance the budget. They refuse to even acknowledge that there is a spending problem, and they keep shoveling more and more money out the door. And to their shame, the chattering classes, the pundits, the columnists, the mayors, the premiers, let them get away with, rebranding program spending as quote-unquote social infrastructure. And, why isn't borrowing for infrastructure a good thing? We should be pushing back a lot harder on the Trudeau government and demanding fiscal responsibility, or we're going to find ourselves in the same place Paul Martin found himself in 1995 when he had to come in and deliver a budget that actually did, for real, cut spending.
Well, at one point, the deficit clock on the front lawn of the Vancouver Art Gallery reached 0 and was in the plus category. Now, again, the numbers are just astounding.
Yeah, if you go to debtclock.ca, we actually have set up an online version so people can see what the debt is there. And you can plug in your favorite date. Since Confederation, plug in your birthday, see what the debt was then. Plug in, 1900, see what the debt was then. You'll see it's kind of ebbed and flowed. And right now, Trudeau is packing on the debt, and not for the things that he claims he is. He claims it's for infrastructure, which people think means bridges and, sky trains and things like that. Well, that's a complete lie. The debt so far that he's packed on is for program spending, for taking care of his friends in the bureaucratic ranks, for expanding the size and role of government. It's not for the actual things that he said it would be.
I know there have been complaints that the infrastructure money hasn't been put into actual concrete and steel.
No, exactly. They use this term social infrastructure, which is something like half of the overall quote-unquote infrastructure spending they're doing. Social infrastructure, it's an oxymoron. That's a word two words that should not be connected together. Infrastructure, by its definition, should not be social. It should be those bricks and mortar, steel and, concrete, tangible assets going forward. Social infrastructure, while important, social programs important, absolutely, got to take care of the poor, got to do those things. That is not infrastructure. That is kind of that program spending year to year. But look, Justin Trudeau never met a group of people he didn't want to buy off with their own money. Bill Morneau is turning out to be one of the worst finance ministers in Canadian history, and he's only on budget number 2. So, when you don't have a plan to balance the budget, when the Parliamentary Budget Office says, look, the deficit's going to grow through 2050, you got to wonder, all this talk about wanting to do the right thing for the next generation seems to me to be a bunch of BS.
Well, I've heard that it could take, if we just freeze it at this point, it could take 100 years to pay off the current debt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we would still be going further into debt every year because the deficit adds to that debt every year. So, yeah, it's a terrible situation we're starting to find ourselves in. And look, we're not saying Harper was perfect. He was far from it, and he increased debt and blundered through that infrastructure program that was supposed to help after the 2008 global economic meltdown. We were very critical of him as well. And we're going to be critical of every government that spends more than they bring in. But, as bad as Harper was, Trudeau is just taking this to a completely different level. And, because he was on his political honeymoon and, he looks pretty and, is, not Donald Trump, he gets too much of a free pass from people.
We'll have more with Jordan Bateman right after the break.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Jordan Bateman. Jordan, if you were the finance minister of Canada, what would you do if you had a chance to put together a budget?
I'd go back to, I would pick up the telephone. I would call the Right Honorable Paul Martin, Great, probably the greatest finance minister we've had in recent memory in Canada. I would bring him in and I would show him where we're at, and I'd say, Paul, how the heck did you balance this thing in 1995, 1996? How did you turn us around from the Wall Street Journal calling Canada an honorary member of the third world? How did you, decide to turn the corner on debt? And I would follow his blueprint, which is, frankly, cutting spending, saying no to these special interest groups. Let's start freezing the public service pay and start, eliminating through attrition and other means some of these jobs. Let's stop growing the size of government. This is, to me, kind of the core thing that, we're rushing towards. And Justin Trudeau, look, you may be prime minister for 4 years, 8 years, 12 years. At some point, there will be a reckoning. The Canadian economy, the bond rating will change. The Canadian economy will be in shambles. And a Paul Martin type will have to stand up and cut this budget and cut the spending and cut back on all of these, frankly, dumb things that Justin Trudeau is doing. So, yeah, the funny thing is I'm not asking them to be more like a conservative government. I'm asking them to be more like the 1990s federal Liberals.
Why do you think there's such a push in the government to boost spending in areas where there was no spending before?
Well, I remember when Trudeau won and the day after he walked into, I forget, it was at the Foreign Affairs building, and all the bureaucrats gathered, and there he was, the Prime Minister with his, his aura and his entourage, and they spontaneously broke out into a standing ovation for him. Like, he loves government. Everything about his life has been given to him by the Canadian government, the Canadian taxpayer. He's got a silver spoon in his mouth. He doesn't really know what it's like to have to own a business, run a business, face the tough decision of laying someone off because you can't afford both your taxes and your labor costs. I think that would be a completely different kind of conversation, if he'd had that background. So, yeah, the federal Liberals are very close to all of these public sector unions, and they feel like they owe them. And judging by their program spending, they're paying them back in spades.
We'll have more with Jordan Bateman right after this.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're chatting with Jordan Bateman. Jordan, do BC media outlets thrive on advertising bought by the BC government, and could it be considered pay for play?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, obviously it does help their bottom line, and certainly the news business is changing and struggling in a way that we've never seen before. I don't care about the media side of it. It's more appalling just the government side of it. Governments have to have some kind of self-control where they don't do this kind of spending. But the problem with political parties and governments is they'll constantly do what works. And this worked in the 2013 election for the Liberals. So it should come as no surprise that they would replicate the model in 2017. And, frankly, they'll probably keep doing it until they're defeated. In which case, then they'll probably start calling for legislation to prevent governments from doing that in the future, just to try to tie the NDP's hands if they lost to them. So we've long advocated the old Ontario model, which was to have every single piece of government advertising pass through the hands of the Auditor General's office, to be vetted for fairness, for necessity. It was not uncommon for the Ontario Auditor General to demand color changes in ad schemes because they would be too close to the Ontario Liberal colors or whatever party was in government. So we need that kind of unbiased look at it, and we should be limiting government advertising to what's statutorily required.
Well, I have noticed that the BC government ads and the ads for the Liberal Party of BC, the logo is almost the same.
Yeah, and that wouldn't have happened under the Ontario model. The Auditor General would have flagged that and forced them to change. So, that to me is the proper solution here. But it's one of those things that's almost impossible to get government to do in the last 2 years of their mandate. It's something that if you're going to try to put public pressure on them to change, you've got to do it when they're first elected and riding high on their win. Because it is basically them tying their own hands and, leading up to an election. So, got to do that in the first year or two of a term.
How much has the long-term debt for BC increased during the reign of the Clark-Campbell government, and how could it ever be repaid?
Well, back in the day, Gordon Campbell had actually gotten it paid down to about $33 billion in 2007, $33.4 billion. It's now headed towards $75 billion within the next couple of years. So more than doubled since 2007. The way to pay it down is very simple. It's being choosier about the projects that you're investing in. It is, maybe putting off some of these things down the road or not doing them at all. And it's, trying to save enough money within your operating budget so that you can use that to help finance some of these capital projects. Right now, it seems like the default for every government is just to simply borrow when it comes to a capital project. In the olden days, governments used to save up money before they spent it. We'd like to see a return to that kind of responsibility.
Is government corruption at all levels in Canada under more of a spotlight now?
Corruption? Is it under more of a spotlight? I think it is. I think people, integrity, ethics in government, I think seeing, the dirt on both sides of the aisle in the United States, I mean, neither side is clean. And I think Canadians really don't want to think that their government is the same way and have those same kind of issues. And then there's the integrity about dealing with our tax dollars or dealing with laws and things like that. There's personal integrity too. I was pretty sickened of, I think, the Don Meredith stuff, the senator who's been caught with a woman under 18 and, reprimanded by the Senate and refusing to resign. I think that's appalling. I think it's sick. I think it's awful, and I think he's someone who should be punished very severely. And at the very least, should be losing his Senate post and, probably facing a lot worse. So, integrity in government is always going to be an important thing. The question is, for the BC context, will it actually move votes? And I've yet to see any polling, not that BC polling has the best reputation, but I get to see any polling that there's going to be a driving issue in this election.
Do taxpayers have recourse against corrupt politicians after they've left office?
No, not really. And that's part of the problem. We got the previous government very close to passing a law that would have revoked the pensions of any politician who committed a crime, was found guilty in court of a crime. A serious crime, and it almost got passed, and then the House prorogued, so it fell by the wayside. But that's a rule that we think should be in place because, at the very least, we should not be paying the pensions of these guys who have been convicted of breaking the public trust.
Should government whistleblowers be protected and rewarded?
I don't know about rewarded, but they should certainly be protected. I don't know, being rewarded to do the right thing, who cares? I think the right thing should be enough motivation. But they should certainly be protected. There should be, all sorts of anonymous channels set up for people to be able to blow the whistle on malfeasance. But yeah, I mean, I'm not into giving them cash rewards for this sort of stuff.
That's what Crime Stoppers is for.
Yeah, and look, Crime Stoppers, if you listen to some of the criminal justice podcasts, read some of the criminal justice research, even Crime Stoppers has some unintended consequences that aren't necessarily good. So, let's not get too crazy. If you start paying people for that kind of stuff, you can see a situation where someone frames someone else, in order to get an enemy fired and to get a cash reward or something like that. That would be an unintended consequence of a policy like that.
Well, the head of Crime Stoppers told me when I asked him where do most of the tips come from, and he said 90% are from fellow criminals turning each other in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true, but there have been many cases where it's turned out to be false confessions, false tips, or even planted tips by police. So those are unintended consequences of what's probably a pretty good program.
Jordan, thank you so much for being on the Goddard Report.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My guest has been Jordan Bateman, the BC director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, their website, taxpayer.com. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Thanks a lot for listening to the Goddard Report. I am Jim Goddard. Join us again as soon as you can.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.